Atlas had never disobeyed Caleb Rowe. Not once. Not in rain. Not under sirens. Not with the sharp crack of training rounds echoing across the field like distant thunder. So when the German shepherd refused to climb into the truck that evening, Caleb felt something in the air change. The sun was sinking behind the low hills beyond the K9 training grounds, washing the gravel lot in copper light. The day had been long, full of scent drills, obstacle runs, and quiet commands spoken between a Marine and the dog who understood him better than most people ever had. Caleb stood beside the open passenger door of his black Ford pickup, one hand resting on the frame, the other holding Atlas's lead. "Load up," he said. His voice was calm, firm, familiar. Atlas did not move. He stood 6 feet from the truck, paws planted in the gravel, sable coat glowing dark gold along the edges, ears raised high toward the road beyond the fence. His amber eyes were not on Caleb. They were fixed past him, past the training sheds, past the line of pine trees, toward a narrow service road half hidden by weeds. Caleb waited. A breeze moved across the lot, carrying the smell of cut grass, worn leather, gun oil, and the faint rubber scent from the agility course. Somewhere behind the kennels, a metal gate tapped softly in the wind. "Atlas," Caleb said, lower this time. The dog's tail stayed still. That was the part Caleb noticed first. Atlas was never restless without reason. He was not stubborn. He was not dramatic. He was precise, the kind of dog who could read a room before a human hand reached for a handle, the kind who could sense tension in a voice before the words turned sharp. Caleb stepped closer and touched the lead. The moment his fingers tightened, Atlas trembled. Not from fear. Not exactly. It was smaller than that. Deeper. Like a memory passing through muscle. Caleb's face changed. He was a white Marine in his mid-30s, broad-shouldered and quiet, with close-cropped brown hair and blue-gray eyes that had learned to watch everything. Most people saw discipline when they looked at him. Atlas saw the tired place underneath. The place Caleb kept locked away behind routine and orders and early morning runs. The dog had walked beside him through months of training, through sleepless nights, through the strange silence that comes after a man returns home but does not fully arrive. Caleb opened the truck door wider. "Come on, boy. We're done for today." Atlas finally looked at him. Just once. Then he turned his head back toward the old road and gave one sound, low and restrained, not a bark, not a growl, but something almost like a warning folded into a plea. Caleb followed the line of his gaze. Beyond the fence, the service road curved toward a forgotten neighborhood near the edge of town, a place of boarded windows, empty lots, and front porches no one sat on anymore. The town had been meaning to clear it for years. Somehow it remained. Caleb sighed through his nose, trying to make sense of it. "There's nothing out there." Atlas took one step forward, then another. The lead slid tight between them. Caleb did not move. For a moment, man and dog stood in the fading light. The truck door opened behind them, the training field emptying into dusk. A small sound carried across the gravel, maybe a bird in the brush, maybe loose tin shifting on an old roof somewhere down the road. Atlas heard it first. Caleb only saw what it did to him. The dog's body lowered into focus, every line alert, every breath measured. Then Atlas turned away from the truck completely and started walking. Not fast, not wild, like he knew exactly where he had to go. Caleb looked once at the empty passenger seat, then at the road Atlas had chosen. Something in his chest tightened, the same quiet instinct that had kept him alive in places where ignoring a small sign could cost everything. He closed the truck door without getting in. "All right," he whispered. "Show me." Atlas did not look back. The old service road had no street lights, only a pale strip of gravel winding between the back fence of the training grounds and the darkening line of pine trees. Caleb followed a few steps behind Atlas, letting the lead stay loose, because something in the dog's posture told him this was not disobedience. This was purpose. The evening air had cooled fast, dropping into the low 60s, and the last warmth of the day lifted off the pavement in thin, fading waves. Crickets had begun their steady chorus in the grass. Somewhere far off, a pickup rolled down the highway, its tires humming like a memory passing through another life. Caleb kept his right hand near the lead clip, not out of fear, but habit. He had been trained to notice what did not belong. A broken branch, a fresh tire mark, a curtain moving in a house that should be empty. Years in uniform had taught him that silence was never just silence. It had weight. It had direction. Atlas moved with his nose low, then high, then low again, reading the world in layers Caleb could not see. His paws made almost no sound on the gravel. Every few yards, he paused, breathing through his nose in slow, deliberate pulls, then continued toward the bend where the road dipped beneath a canopy of old oaks. Caleb watched him closely. He had seen Atlas track missing gear through mud, locate training scent under stacked crates, and ignore distractions that would have broken a younger dog. But this was different. Atlas was not searching in a pattern. He was remembering a trail that had never been taught to him. Caleb's jaw tightened. He did not like that thought. Memories were dangerous things when they walked ahead of you. On his chest, beneath his faded gray shirt, Caleb felt the soft weight of his own dog tags shift with each step. One tag was his. The other was not. It had belonged to a friend from his old unit, a man who used to say that dogs knew the truth before people were brave enough to name it. Caleb had laughed the first time he heard that. He did not laugh now. He had come home from service with all the correct answers and none of the right ones. Sleep was shallow. Crowds felt too loud. Empty rooms felt worse. The training field gave him structure. Atlas gave him rhythm. Feed the dog. Run the course. Check the lead. Give the command. Praise the response. Repeat until the day became survivable. That was how Caleb had rebuilt himself, not all at once, but inch by inch, like a damaged fence standing because someone kept replacing one board at a time. Atlas stopped at the bend. His ears angled forward. Beyond the trees, the forgotten neighborhood appeared through the dimming light. It was not far from town, maybe half a mile from the main road, but it felt farther, as if the map had folded around it and left it behind. Small houses sat back from cracked sidewalks. Porches sagged under peeling paint. Mailboxes leaned in the weeds, their numbers faded almost white. A few windows were boarded. Others reflected the sunset with a blank, empty shine. Caleb slowed. "This where you wanted to go?" he asked quietly. Atlas did not answer. He stepped off the gravel and onto the broken sidewalk, leading Caleb past a rusted bicycle frame tangled in vines, past a yard where yellow grass had grown knee-high, past a wind chime that turned without sound beneath a porch roof. The air smelled different here. Older. Damp wood. Dust. Leaves packed beneath floorboards. And underneath it, so faint Caleb might have imagined it, something clean and sour at the same time, like spoiled milk near antiseptic. Atlas lifted his head. His body stilled. Caleb saw the house then, white once, now gray with weather, sitting at the end of the block behind a crooked picket fence. The front porch leaned slightly to the left. One shutter hung loose. A dry bowl rested near the steps, turned on its side. Atlas walked straight toward it and stopped at the bottom stair. Then he sat. Not casually. Not tired. He sat in the exact posture Caleb knew from training, spine straight, chest forward, eyes locked on the shadow beneath the porch. Caleb felt the air leave his lungs. "Atlas," he whispered. The dog did not look away. Caleb took one careful step closer, and the porch gave a soft wooden creak, though no one stood on it. Caleb stood at the foot of the porch and listened. At first, there was only the soft ticking of the cooling evening, the dry scrape of leaves along the curb, and the low hum of distant traffic moving somewhere beyond the trees. The house before him looked abandoned in the ordinary way old houses do: tired paint, sagging steps, windows filmed with dust, a screen door hanging slightly open as if the last person to leave had meant to come back before supper and never did. But Atlas did not care about what the house looked like. His world was not paint or glass or county notices stapled to a post. His world was breath, salt, fear, old rain, and the thin living thread hidden beneath all of it. Caleb crouched beside him and laid a hand gently between his shoulders. The dog's muscles were locked, but not from panic. From certainty. "Easy," Caleb murmured. Atlas answered with a quiet exhale through his nose, eyes still fixed on the black space below the porch boards. Caleb looked there too. Nothing moved. The gap beneath the porch was narrow, maybe 18 inches high, packed with fallen leaves, scraps of insulation, and the pale ribs of old latticework. A spiderweb trembled in the corner. The dry bowl near the steps rolled slightly when the breeze touched it, making a hollow sound against the wood. Caleb reached for his phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through dust and shadow. For a second, It showed nothing but dirt, broken boards, and a child's red plastic shovel half buried under leaves. Then Atlas leaned forward. His ears lifted another inch. Caleb followed the light farther under the porch and saw a mark on one of the lower beams. Not fresh, not old enough to disappear. Scratches, 4 or 5 of them, dragged into the gray wood in short, desperate lines. Caleb swallowed. He moved the light again. Near the second step, tucked between 2 warped boards, something caught the beam and flashed dull silver. Caleb reached carefully through the weeds and pulled it free. It was a torn dog collar, stiff with dirt, the buckle bent, the fabric faded from what had once been military green. Attached to it was a small metal tag, scratched almost smooth. He rubbed it with his thumb until the letters showed. Mara. Caleb said the name under his breath, and Atlas made a sound so soft it almost disappeared before it reached the air. The name meant nothing to Caleb, but it meant something to the silence. He could feel that now. The porch was not empty. It was holding its breath. Caleb stood and stepped onto the first stair. The wood complained under his boot. Atlas rose at once, not pulling, just watching him with that steady amber focus that said move carefully, not slowly. Caleb tested the second step. It dipped more than it should have. He backed off and walked along the edge of the porch, searching for another opening. The house stared down at him with blank windows. A curtain inside shifted, though the window was closed. Maybe a draft. Maybe settling wood. Maybe nothing. Caleb had learned that maybe nothing was still worth respecting. He circled to the side yard, where weeds brushed his jeans and mosquitoes hovered in the damp shade. Behind the porch, the lattice had broken away from one corner. Atlas moved to it immediately and lowered his nose to the ground. He inhaled once, then sat again, perfectly still. Caleb felt the skin along his arms tighten. That was not the signal for a dead scent. It was not the signal for chemicals. It was the signal Atlas used when something living was near and unreachable. Caleb knelt by the broken lattice and aimed his phone light inside. The beam trembled in his hand. Beneath the porch, there was an old blanket pulled into a nest against the foundation wall. Beside it lay a small stuffed rabbit, one ear dark with dirt, one button eye missing. Caleb's breath caught. "Hello," he called, keeping his voice low, calm, the way he had been taught to speak around fear. "This is Caleb Rowe. I am here to help." No answer came. The neighborhood remained still, wrapped in amber dusk and old dust. Caleb listened harder. Atlas leaned forward until the lead tightened against Caleb's wrist. Then, from under the porch, something answered. Not a voice. Not quite. A faint tap against wood. One time. Then silence. Caleb froze. Atlas did not. He lowered his head and gave one quiet whine, gentle as a prayer slipping beneath a door. Caleb held his breath long enough to hear his own pulse in his ears. The faint tap had come from somewhere behind the loose lattice, too soft to be wind, too deliberate to be settling wood. Atlas stood beside him, body lowered, eyes fixed into the dark space beneath the porch as if he were guarding a doorway no one else could see. Caleb lifted the phone again, letting the flashlight crawl over the blanket, the stuffed rabbit, the broken boards, and the deep pocket of shadow tucked against the foundation. "I heard you," he said softly. "Stay with me." For several seconds, nothing answered. Then came another tap, weaker this time. Caleb's throat tightened. He set the phone on a flat stone with the light aimed inward, then reached for the lattice panel. It resisted at first, nailed down by age and swollen from old rain. He pulled gently, not wanting to send splinters inward. The wood groaned. Atlas shifted closer, nose working, every breath sharp and measured. Caleb braced one boot against the ground and eased the panel back inch by inch until one corner snapped free with a dry crack that sounded too loud in the abandoned yard. He paused, listening. No voices from nearby houses. No doors opening. No footsteps. Only crickets, a distant highway, and Atlas breathing beside him like a living metronome. Caleb took out his pocket knife and worked at the remaining strip of wood until the opening widened enough for him to see farther inside. The smell came first. Damp fabric. Old leaves. Stale air trapped too long beneath low boards. Underneath it was the faint, clean scent he had noticed before, softer now, but unmistakable. Baby lotion. Caleb went very still. "Atlas," he whispered. The German shepherd looked at him once, and in that look Caleb saw no confusion, no fear, only the solemn patience of a creature who had already accepted the truth, and was waiting for the human heart to catch up. Caleb reached for his phone and dialed emergency services. The dispatcher answered after one ring. Caleb gave the address from the faded mailbox, his name, and his location. His voice stayed level because training held it there, but his eyes never left the darkness beneath the porch. "I have reason to believe someone is trapped under the front porch of an abandoned residence," he said. "Possibly a child. I have a trained K9 indicating living scent." The dispatcher began asking questions, calm and careful, but Caleb heard only pieces. "Is the structure stable? Is anyone visibly injured? Can you safely access the space?" He answered what he could. "No visible injuries yet. Structure uncertain. Access limited. Emergency crews were on the way." He ended the call only when the dispatcher told him to keep the line open. So he set the phone on speaker near the stone and lowered himself to the ground. The dirt was cool under his palms. His knees pressed into wet leaves. Atlas stepped forward, but Caleb held up one hand. "Wait." The command was barely a breath. Atlas obeyed, though every part of him leaned toward the opening. Caleb lay flat and angled his shoulders beneath the porch just far enough to see beyond the first beam. The space was tighter than he expected, maybe 2 feet in the tallest place, narrowing toward the foundation wall. His flashlight caught the blanket again. Then the blanket moved. Not much, just a small rise and fall, so slight that he almost missed it. Caleb's mouth went dry. "Hey," he said, voice breaking into gentleness. "You are not alone now." A sound came back. A tiny breath. A whisper that might have been a word, or might have been only the body trying to hold on. Atlas gave another low whine, softer than before, and lowered himself to the ground until his chin touched the dirt. He stretched his nose toward the darkness without pushing forward, as if he knew the soul inside needed comfort more than urgency. Caleb moved the light an inch to the left and finally saw her. A little girl curled against the old blanket, small enough that her pink sleeve looked like a fallen flower in the dust. Her hair clung damply to her forehead. One hand rested near the stuffed rabbit. Beside her, pressed close like a wall of warmth, lay an older German shepherd with a gray muzzle and tired amber eyes. Mara. The dog lifted her head only a fraction, too weak to rise, but her gaze found Atlas through the dark. Atlas did not bark. He did not pull. He simply stared back, steady and reverent, as if one soldier had found another at the end of a long watch. Caleb did not move for one full breath. He had seen difficult things in his life, enough to know that rushing toward fear could sometimes make it worse. So he kept his voice low and his body still, letting the little girl hear calm before she saw rescue. "My name is Caleb," he said again. "I am right here. Help is coming." The child's eyes fluttered, then closed, then opened just enough to catch the light. She was awake, but barely, her small face flushed with fever and dust, her lips dry, her fingers curled around the torn ear of the stuffed rabbit as if it were the last familiar thing in the world. Mara watched Caleb with exhausted caution. The old German shepherd's body was thin beneath her faded coat, but she had positioned herself between the child and the open darkness, not threatening, not wild, simply faithful beyond reason. Caleb understood that posture. He had seen it in Atlas when strangers came too close on bad nights. He had felt it in himself long ago, in places where men learned that protection was sometimes nothing more than staying awake when everyone else could not. "Good girl," Caleb whispered to Mara. "You did good." Mara's ears twitched at the sound of kindness. Atlas lowered his head beside Caleb's shoulder, nose pointed toward the child, and gave one gentle breath through the opening. The little girl stirred. Her eyes moved toward him. "Dog," she whispered, so faint Caleb almost thought he had imagined it. "Yes," Caleb said, his voice catching. "That is Atlas. He found you." From the phone on the stone, the dispatcher's voice came through, asking Caleb to describe the child's condition and whether he could reach her safely. He answered carefully. "She is conscious. She appears dehydrated. There is an older dog with her. The space is narrow. The porch may be unstable." Emergency lights were still distant, but Caleb could hear them now, a thin rising sound threading through the empty neighborhood. He turned his head and saw red and white flickering far beyond the trees. Atlas saw them too, but he did not leave his post. Caleb eased one arm farther under the porch, palm up, not grabbing, only offering. "Can you touch my hand?" he asked. The little girl tried. Her fingers shifted across the blanket, and stopped inches away. Mara lifted her head again, then, with a strength that seemed impossible, nudged the child's wrist forward with her nose. The girl's fingertips brushed Caleb's hand. Small, warm, alive. Something inside Caleb broke open, but quietly. There was no dramatic sound, no sudden speech, just a crack through the wall he had built around himself. He blinked hard and held that tiny hand as gently as if he were holding a candle flame in the wind. "I have got you," he said. "Nobody is leaving you here." Atlas pressed his shoulder against Caleb's side. The weight steadied him. A police cruiser reached the curb first, followed by a fire rescue truck and an ambulance. Boots moved through the weeds. Radios crackled. A firefighter named Donnelly knelt beside Caleb, a broad man with gray in his mustache and a face made serious by years of showing up on hard days. He took one look beneath the porch and lowered his voice. "We are going to take this slow." Caleb nodded. Together, they removed more of the lattice, then supported the porch with short cribbing blocks from the rescue truck. No one shouted. No one rushed. The whole yard seemed to hold itself still while the rescuers made a safe path through the old wood. Through it all, Mara did not move away from the child until Atlas shifted closer to the opening and lay down facing her. It was not a command anyone gave. It was an agreement between dogs. Mara watched him for a long moment, tired amber eyes meeting his. Then her body softened, just enough. She let Caleb and Donnelly reach the girl. When Caleb lifted the child carefully into the evening air, she clutched the stuffed rabbit to her chest and whispered something no one else heard. But Caleb heard it. Mara stayed. Caleb looked back under the porch. The old dog's head had lowered again, her strength spent, but her eyes remained open. Atlas rose slowly beside Caleb, not triumphant, not excited, only solemn. The ambulance doors opened, spilling warm light across the ruined yard. And for the first time since Atlas had refused the truck, Caleb understood. The dog had not led him to a house. He had led him to a promise that had almost gone unheard. The little girl was wrapped in a thermal blanket and carried toward the ambulance under the slow pulse of red and white lights. She looked smaller in open air than she had beneath the porch, as if the darkness had been holding part of her weight. A paramedic knelt beside her, speaking in a voice so gentle it seemed to lower the temperature of the whole yard. Caleb stood a few feet away with dirt on his sleeves and splinters caught in the fabric of his jeans, watching her fingers hold the stuffed rabbit against her chest. Atlas sat beside him, close enough that his shoulder brushed Caleb's leg. The German shepherd did not look at the flashing lights or the strangers moving through the yard. His eyes stayed on Mara. The older dog had not been lifted out yet. Firefighter Donnelly and a veterinary responder from the county animal unit were working carefully near the opening, sliding a soft rescue board beneath her body and speaking to her as if every word mattered. Mara's eyes followed the child until the ambulance doors nearly blocked her view. Only then did she let out a faint sound, hardly more than air passing through tired lungs. Atlas stood at once. Caleb felt the lead tighten. "Easy," he whispered, but he did not pull him back. Atlas moved forward slowly, stopping just outside the rescue team's circle. He lowered his head, and Mara turned her gray muzzle toward him. For a moment, no one said anything. The radio seemed quieter. The crickets seemed farther away. Two German shepherds faced each other across the broken edge of the porch, one strong and young, one worn nearly to nothing, and somehow the yard felt like a chapel. Caleb reached into his shirt and touched the dog tags resting against his chest. His thumb found the edge of the second tag, the one that was not his. He had carried it so long that sometimes he forgot its weight until grief reminded him. On the tag was the name of a Marine who had once believed that mercy had its own chain of command. It passed from one living soul to another, from a man to a dog, from a dog to a child, from a forgotten porch to everyone willing to stop. The child's name, they learned from a small bracelet on her wrist, was Lily, 3 years old. She had been reported missing 2 days earlier from a neighboring county after a confused family emergency that left more questions than answers. No one at the scene spoke harshly about it. Not yet. The night was not ready for blame. It was busy making room for breath. Caleb heard one officer say that the house had belonged to an elderly widow named Eleanor Pierce, whose late husband had served in the Marine Corps decades ago. Neighbors thought the place had been empty since Eleanor passed that spring. Mara had been her service dog, loyal to the end, and after the estate became tangled in paperwork, the old dog had somehow been overlooked in the shuffle of locks, notices, and silence. Caleb looked back at the porch, at the dry bowl, at the faded collar in his hand. Overlooked. The word was too clean for what it meant. Donnelly and the veterinary responder lifted Mara at last. She did not resist. Her body was light, almost weightless under the blanket they placed over her, but her eyes stayed open. When they carried her past Caleb, he stepped closer. "You kept watch," he said softly. Mara blinked once, slow and tired. Atlas pressed his nose to the edge of her blanket, and for the first time since they arrived, the old dog's tail moved. Not much, just one faint sweep against the rescue board. It was enough. Caleb turned away before anyone could see his face too clearly. The ambulance doors closed around Lily, filling the inside with warm light and quiet hands. Mara was placed in a separate animal rescue van, oxygen flowing through a small mask held gently near her muzzle. Atlas watched both vehicles as if memorizing where each soul was being taken. Caleb stood between them, the evening wind cooling the sweat on his neck, the abandoned houses silent around him. He had spent years believing rescue meant force, speed, commands, and control. But tonight rescue had looked like refusal. A dog refusing a truck. An old porch refusing to stay silent. A child refusing to let go of a dirty stuffed rabbit. Mara refusing to leave a little girl alone in the dark. When the vehicles pulled away, Caleb remained in the yard with Atlas beside him, the torn green collar resting in his palm. The porch creaked once behind them, softer now, as if the house itself had finally exhaled. By the time Caleb and Atlas reached the emergency veterinary clinic, night had settled over the town in a soft blue hush. The clinic sat beside a two-lane road about 4 miles from the forgotten neighborhood, its windows glowing warm against the darkness, its small parking lot washed in the steady amber light of a single street lamp. Caleb parked beside the county animal rescue van and stepped out slowly, the torn green collar still folded in his hand. Atlas jumped down after him without being told. He landed lightly, then stood facing the clinic doors, ears forward, waiting. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic, clean towels, and nervous hope. A young technician looked up from the front desk, but before she could speak, a veterinarian in navy scrubs came through the swinging doors from the treatment area. Her name tag read Dr. Hannah Price. She was in her early 40s, with tired, kind eyes and silver beginning at her temples, the kind of person who had learned to move quickly without making fear worse. "You are Caleb Rowe," she said. Caleb nodded. "How is she?" Dr. Price did not answer right away. She looked through the glass window toward the treatment room, where Mara lay on a padded table beneath a warming blanket. A small oxygen line rested near her muzzle. Her gray face was turned toward the door, and even from a distance Caleb could see that her eyes were open. "She is weak," the veterinarian said gently. "Very weak. But she is fighting." Caleb looked down at Atlas. The German shepherd had gone still again, not the tense stillness from the porch, but something quieter, almost respectful. "Can he see her?" Caleb asked. Dr. Price studied Atlas for a moment. Maybe she saw the mud on his paws, or the steady focus in his eyes, or the way Caleb's hand rested near his collar without holding him back. "For a minute," she said. "Only if he stays calm." Caleb gave a small nod. "He will." The treatment room was bright, too bright after the dark streets, but Atlas entered softly, each step careful on the polished floor. Mara's ears twitched before she saw him. Caleb stopped a few feet from the table, but Atlas moved one step closer and lowered his head to the edge of the blanket. He did not lick her. He did not whine. He simply breathed near her, slow and steady, offering his strength without demanding anything in return. Mara's tail moved once beneath the blanket. Dr. Price turned away for a moment, pretending to check a monitor. Caleb saw her wipe one eye with the back of her wrist. On a counter nearby lay Mara's file, already pieced together from the county records. Eleanor Pierce, widow of Staff Sergeant Daniel Pierce. Service dog registration. Medical alerts. Companion certification. Caleb read the names and fragments while Dr. Price explained what the responders had found. Eleanor had lived alone after her husband passed, with Mara trained to help her through dizzy spells and long, lonely afternoons. The neighbors remembered seeing the old dog beside her mailbox, beside her garden, beside the porch every Sunday when church bells rang from downtown. After Eleanor died, the paperwork moved slowly. The relatives lived out of state. The house was locked, listed, delayed, forgotten. Mara had been seen only once or twice after that, slipping through a gap beneath the porch, surviving on rainwater and whatever scraps she could find. Then Lily came into the story like a question no one was ready to answer. A sheriff's deputy arrived at the clinic with more details, speaking quietly near the hallway, so the room would remain peaceful. Lily had wandered from a relative's car during a roadside stop after a family medical emergency. Confusion, rain, poor cell service, and a wrong assumption had stretched hours into days. Search teams had been looking miles away, following the last confirmed sighting. Somehow, Lily had found the empty neighborhood. Somehow, Mara had found Lily. Or perhaps, Caleb thought, the lonely recognize the lost before the rest of the world even starts looking. The deputy said no one understood how the little girl ended up beneath that porch, only that the old dog had stayed with her, keeping her warm through 2 cold nights, leaving only long enough to nose through trash cans behind nearby houses and return with bits of food no child that young should have had to trust. Caleb closed his eyes. Not from horror, from the weight of tenderness. There was a kind of mercy so fierce it almost hurt to witness. Across the room, Atlas remained beside Mara, his amber eyes half lowered, his breathing matching hers in a slow rhythm. Caleb thought of all the commands he had taught him. Sit, stay, track, guard, return. But no one had taught Atlas what happened that evening. No one had trained him to hear a promise buried beneath old boards. No one had taught Mara to spend the last of her strength protecting a child who was not hers. Dr. Price checked Mara's pulse again and smiled faintly. Her heart is steadier, she said. Caleb looked at Atlas, then at the old dog on the table. For the first time all night, the tightness in his chest loosened. Not enough to call it peace, but enough to breathe. The hospital called just after midnight. Caleb was sitting in his truck outside the veterinary clinic with Atlas in the passenger seat, both of them facing the quiet road while the dashboard clock glowed blue in the dark. He had not gone home. He had tried twice. Each time his hand touched the ignition, Atlas lifted his head and looked through the windshield toward the clinic doors, and Caleb understood without needing another refusal. Some nights did not let you leave until the story decided what kind of ending it would become. His phone vibrated in the cup holder. The nurse on the line spoke gently. Lily was stable. Dehydrated, scared, exhausted, but stable. She had asked twice about Mara and once about the man with the dog. Caleb closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the seat. The breath that left him felt older than the night itself. Thank you, he said. His voice was rough. Please tell her Mara is being cared for. The nurse promised she would. When the call ended, Caleb sat in the silence with the phone resting in his palm. Atlas shifted closer and placed his chin on Caleb's forearm, warm, heavy, alive. That simple weight undid him. Caleb turned his face toward the driver's side window, but there was no hiding from a dog. Tears came quietly, not many at first, then enough that he stopped trying to count them. He had cried before in his life, but mostly in private, mostly in the dark, mostly with the kind of shame men sometimes mistake for strength. This felt different. This was not grief alone. It was relief. It was gratitude. It was the terrible beauty of almost losing something precious and then hearing it breathe again. You heard her, Caleb whispered. Atlas blinked slowly, as if the answer had always been simple. Caleb looked down at the dog tags against his chest. The metal had warmed from his skin. He remembered his friend from the old unit saying that a soul could go deaf if it spent too many years surrounded by pain. At the time, Caleb had thought that meant weakness. Now he wondered if it meant survival. Maybe he had stopped listening because listening hurt. Maybe Atlas had been listening for both of them all along. Inside the clinic, Dr. Price finally stepped out through the front doors, her navy scrubs wrinkled, her hair pulled loose at the temples. Caleb got out of the truck before she reached him. Atlas followed, landing softly on the pavement. The veterinarian's face was tired, but there was light in it. Mara made it through the first critical hours, she said. She is not out of the woods yet, but she is stronger than she should be. Caleb nodded once, looking past her into the warm glass of the clinic. Can I see her again? Dr. Price opened the door wider. Both of you. Mara was resting when they entered, covered by a clean blanket the color of oatmeal. The oxygen line was still near her muzzle, and a small intravenous line ran to one front leg, taped carefully in place. She looked fragile, almost transparent beneath the soft light, but when Atlas approached, her eyes opened. Caleb stopped beside the table and rested the torn green collar near her blanket, not around her neck, not yet, just close enough that it belonged to her again. Atlas sat on the floor beside the table. Mara looked at him, then passed him to Caleb. The old dog's tail moved once beneath the blanket. Caleb reached out with 2 fingers and touched the fur between her ears. "You did not quit," he said. The words were meant for Mara, but as soon as he said them, he knew they were meant for himself too. The room grew still around that truth. No music, no speech, only the faint rhythm of machines, the soft breathing of 2 German shepherds, and a Marine standing between the life he had survived and the life still asking him to stay. By morning, pale sunlight began to fill the clinic windows. Atlas had fallen asleep sitting upright, his head resting against Caleb's knee. Caleb had not slept, but something in him had rested anyway. When the first rays touched Mara's gray muzzle, her breathing remained steady. Caleb watched the light move across the blanket and understood, with a quietness that did not need proof, that grace did not always arrive as an answer. Sometimes it arrived as a dog refusing to go home. 3 weeks later, the forgotten house no longer looked forgotten. Morning sunlight fell across the front porch in clean golden sheets, warming the new boards Caleb had helped place where the old wood had given way. The peeling rails had been sanded and painted white. The cracked steps were steady now. On either side of them sat 2 cedar planters filled with yellow mums, bright as small promises against the weathered yard. The house was not finished. Not yet, but it had been saved from silence. The county, the Pierce family, and half the neighborhood had come together after Lily's rescue, not because anyone told them to, but because some stories make people remember who they wanted to be before life made them busy. Eleanor Pierce's old home would become a temporary care house for retired service dogs and children waiting for safe family placement, a place where no one would be left unnamed beneath paperwork or dust. They called it Mara's Porch. Caleb stood at the gate with Atlas at his side, one hand resting loosely on the German shepherd's collar. He wore a clean gray shirt, jeans, and his old boots, still scuffed at the toes from the night everything changed. Around his neck, his dog tags rested beside a small new tag donated by Dr. Price. It was simple, brushed steel, engraved with one line, "Listen for the quiet ones." Caleb had not asked for it, but when she handed it to him, he could not speak. Across the yard, Mara lay on a thick blanket in a patch of sun, thinner than before but alive. Her gray muzzle lifted proudly as volunteers moved around the porch with paint cans, toolboxes, and trays of lemonade. Lily sat beside her in a small denim jacket, healthier now, with color back in her cheeks and the same stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. She was staying with safe relatives while the grown-ups sorted through the rest with care and patience. When she saw Caleb, she smiled shyly and waved with 3 fingers. Atlas saw Mara and stopped. He did not pull. He simply waited until Caleb unclipped the lead. "Go on," Caleb said softly. Atlas crossed the grass with slow respect and lay down beside the older dog. Mara touched her nose to his once, then rested her head again. Lily leaned toward Atlas and whispered something that made his ears twitch. Caleb did not need to hear it. Some blessings were not meant to be translated. He climbed the porch steps and paused where the old opening had been. The boards were smooth now, but Caleb could still feel the memory beneath them, the cold dirt, the weak tap, the breath that almost disappeared. He placed Mara's torn green collar in a small shadow box mounted by the door, beside a photograph of Eleanor and her late Marine husband standing on that same porch years ago, smiling under summer light. For a moment, Caleb saw the whole line of mercy, one life holding another, then another, then another, until even a man who thought he was only following his dog found himself brought back to faith. Atlas returned to him near the steps and leaned against his leg. Caleb lowered his hand to the dog's head. "You heard her before the world did," he whispered. Atlas closed his eyes in the sun. The wind moved softly through the yellow flowers, and the porch that had once hidden a prayer now held laughter, paw prints, and the quiet proof that grace can still find its way home.